Legend of Total War here, and today we're doing another tier list using Tier Maker. This time doing a tier list that encompasses all the Total War games, and we're going to be focusing the topic on sieges, based on whether the game itself had good sieges to terrible sieges, and also discuss what is it about the sieges in those games that either worked or didn't work. But before we get into the actual tier list itself, I need to let you guys know that this video is of course sponsored by Manscaped. So you guys know I've been with Manscaped for ages. They've been a huge supporter of the channel over the past few years. But this time, I got to try out something a little bit different. The Weed Whacker 2.0, which is a nose hair trimmer. Now, I gotta admit, I've never done something like this before, and I was a little bit apprehensive of sticking this thing up my nose. But once it was up there, it cleared out the nose hair super quickly, no pain whatsoever, and I was actually really surprised by how pleasant it really was. Although I do have to admit, there is something satisfying about pulling a nose hair out with your bare fingers and then having your eyes water up like you've just squeezed onions in your eyes. And you don't get that with this at all. But if you're interested at all in the Weed Whacker 2.0 or any of the other Manscaped products, check out the link in the description or in the pinned comment and get 20% off plus free international shipping. Big thanks to Manscaped for sponsoring this video. Okay, onto the tier list itself. Now, this is going to be a very subjective tier list, much more so I think than other tier lists. So it's important to acknowledge that people are going to disagree with what I'm going to put into this tier list, and that's totally fine. I would encourage people to post a comment in the comment section and let me know your thoughts as to which Total War game deserves which particular place and why. Just given a brief overview about what I think makes really good sieges and what makes bad sieges, it really comes down to the variety of options. So when you're both in attack and defense, when you're playing Total War games, you're not always in one situation. Sometimes you're attacking, sometimes you're defending your cities. Giving options so that you don't always play these battles out exactly the same way is really important. So having maps that have variety, so you don't want to feel like in every single situation, regardless of the cultures that you're going up against or the armies that you're going up against, that every battle plays out the same way. You want it to feel different, otherwise it brings on campaign fatigue, which causes people to quit their campaigns. So also having systems within sieges that feel good and that the player is not necessarily avoiding. So for example, you want the walls to mean something for the defender, and for the attacker it has to be some kind of an obstacle. The defender should always have an advantage against even odds in a defensive situation. The attacker should not have the advantage. You don't want to have a situation where the towers are basically useless. Alternatively, you don't want it to be too powerful either, where towers just win the entire battle for you and your army is almost irrelevant. You want morale to matter. It's good when the units route to a specific point as opposed to route outside the settlement when defenders, or you don't want the attackers routing into the settlement. So pathfinding is really important. And there are some Total War games where pathfinding is atrocious. So all of that kind of stuff really plays into whether or not the sieges feel good or not. Now, Rome Total War here. So we're starting at Rome Total War and going in chronological order. Now, this will also include Rome Remastered because they play out exactly the same way in terms of the sieges. I'm not going to include Medieval 1 or Shogun 1 just because I think that those two Total War games are heavily outdated. They don't even run on my computer anymore, and I think that's the case for a lot of people. But I do want to acknowledge that a lot of people do love those two Total War games, and that's fine. I just don't have anything more to say about those two games, but I do have something to say about all the other ones. Okay, so Rome Total War, I'm going to put that under meh sieges, which the reason for this, the primary reason it's going into meh, is because of the pathfinding. On the higher unit scales, which is what I always enjoy playing on, I don't like playing on smaller unit scales, the pathfinding is absolutely atrocious. Units are so unresponsive inside of the cities. They're getting into formation is just the worst in any Total War game, and that is the main thing that holds this game back from getting amazing sieges, because every other element to it is actually really good. It's very satisfying when you've got a good pike unit in a defensive position and the enemy are just throwing wave after wave on it. That's really satisfying. It's satisfying when the towers are burning down the siege equipment and the enemy are climbing up on the walls and fighting your troops. It's all very satisfying when you fall back and fight that final last-ditch effort at the town square where your units are unbreakable because they're fighting to the death. All of those other elements to the sieges, the layouts, the different cultures providing different types of towers, this is all really satisfying. It all just comes down to the pathfinding, that letting it down. Where we then go to Medieval 2, which obviously uses the same systems, but Medieval 2 kind of fixes the pathfinding. So I'm actually going to put Medieval 2 as amazing sieges, because all the good things about Rome Total War sieges, Medieval 2 does, and then some, because you've got more variety in Medieval 2, because you've got the city battles, so go from wooden walls all the way up to stone walls, but then you've also got the castle battles as well, and that's where it really shines, where you've got decent pathfinding. I mean, obviously, you can bug out the units by, like, running them up the walls, up a ladder, and then running them down off the walls at the same time, and then stretching them out all over the place. Pathfinding will be quite bad, but that's the case with every single Total War game. But ultimately, units are quite responsive inside the settlement, way more so than Rome Total War. Even cavalry have a use in sieges, which is an iffy unit in every single Total War game. But it really comes down to the castles having up to 3 layers of defenses, being an absolute monumental effort in order to take on just a small garrison inside of a citadel. So the defender has a massive advantage when holding castles in Medieval 2, which is exactly how it should be. Basically, with Medieval 2, the sieges play out exactly as they should. The defender has the advantage, and the attacker needs to have either a very good understanding of the weaknesses of the enemy or overwhelming force in order to overcome it, which is exactly how the sieges should play out. So Medieval 2 absolutely hits the nails on the head with the sieges. Pretty much all of these systems work really well, from the siege equipment to the various different cultures and what their defenses are, although there's not that much differences between the cultures. They're all fairly close in terms of how they defend their sieges, and the way that castles are just such a good defensive position, and also how cannons make walls irrelevant in the later stages of the campaign with just 1 or 2 shots, as opposed to trebuchets taking forever to demolish the walls. So really good systems there with Medieval 2. Then we've got Empire Total War. Now, Empire Total War, the sieges are kind of a non-issue. There aren't really that many sieges to be had in Empire Total War at all. Technically, you will fight settlement battles, right? But the settlement battles are difficult to distinguish from a regular field battle, because usually what happens is you fight a battle in a settlement and there'll just be like some buildings in the middle of the map, and sometimes some of those buildings you can garrison, but the way that garrisoning works in Empire Total War is a little bit weird. The units don't fire very well, and a cannon can just blow that up. So garrisoning buildings is a bit iffy in Empire Total War. They're nothing more than obstructions, really. And when you do come to sieges, it comes down to whether or not there's a fort built there. And there's 2 types of forts, and there's the square forts and star forts. And really, the sieges in those situations are kind of a grind on both sides. The AI, when attacking, it just do so very slowly. Everyone usually has cannons, so it just usually comes down to the cannons blasting away for 45 minutes. So it can be a bit of a tedious, boring affair. That being said, there are cannons on the fort for you to fire back. I find that the pathfinding is absolutely atrocious, and there is a memory leak issue in Empire Total War. If a breach is made, a memory leak can happen, which can slow down your game to like 1 frame per second if it takes that long. So really sort of grindy, not fun situation there with Empire Total War. So very bad sieges. Systems, not many systems, and very small maps, just not good sieges at all. Unfortunately, Napoleon Total War, which is built off Empire Total War, which it is a better game than Empire Total War, absolutely, but it doesn't really revolutionize the sieges side of things, and suffers from the exact same problem. So I don't really have anything more to say about Napoleon, apart from it is a better game than Empire Total War, just the sieges, it does nothing to further it. Then we've got Shogun 2. Shogun 2 does some really good sieges. I'm going to put that under the good section here, because I think in the early game with sieges, they're a little bit boring, because the maps, like the little hill forts, they're not very interesting. They're just a tiny little hill fort. They don't provide much of an advantage for the defender, and they're all the same across the entirety of Japan. But as the campaign progresses and you start to get beyond tier 2, so when you get to like tier 3, tier 4, tier 5, that's when the maps the forts start getting quite complex, and that's where the fun really happens, because the AI is actually quite competent, well, relatively competent, at assaulting the settlement and defending the settlement at those points. And you've got a lot of options whether or not you want to climb up the walls, sort of using butt ladders, although there's a risk to climbing up the walls. Even samurai units or monk units will fall off to their death. So, or whether or not you want to go through the pathway and burn half the settlement down as you're going. So you've got a lot of tactical options with Shogun 2. I don't think it's anywhere near as good as the sieges in Medieval 2, but I think it's a lot better than what's available in the Rome Total War, and especially the games that came right before them, Empire, Total War, and Napoleon. So I do enjoy the Shogun 2 sieges, specifically in the later stages of the campaign, when you're not just seeing like Ashigaru spam and tiny little forts crammed in with 1,000 men that you can just use archers to bomb them, essentially. So the sieges are mixed with Shogun 2, but mostly good. Then you've got Fall of Samurai, which I would say their sieges build upon Shogun 2 and become amazing, because one of the issues with Shogun 2, what that has is, one of the limiting factors to developing up your forts is food, and each province cannot provide the amount of food needed to get that fort up to maximum. So you're always going to have some settlements providing food for your max level forts, if you want to play that way, that is. And so there can be a bit of reluctance in getting those forts developed, and it takes a lot longer. Whereas in Fall of the Samurai, it doesn't require food. So they've sort of removed a mechanic, but that actually allows for better sieges, because both the AI and the player will develop up those settlements much quicker, and so you'll see more advanced designs of settlements much sooner for both attacking and defending. And there's also a lot more going on because it's much later in the the human timeline, so you're seeing early modern weapons, so a lot more precision artillery. You've got bombardment from naval vessels that are out at sea close by. You've got mostly gun units, unless of course you're specifically going with traditional, and it just works really well. I found some of the defensive sieges that I had with Shogun 2 to be really satisfying. The defender has a massive advantage over the attacker, but a good attacker can definitely find a way in with enough patience and skill at sieging. So it's a really good system there with Shogun 2 Fall of Samurai. Highly recommend the sieges in that game, really across the entire campaign. Then you've got Total War Rome 2. So while I don't really like Rome 2 as a game, and I think some of the fundamental problems with the battle system sort of bleed into the sieges here, but I'm going to put it under good sieges, because the sieges aren't really the problem with Rome 2. So I'll give it a little bit of a pass. There are some really good settlement designs with Rome 2. The walls feel impactful. The fact that you can demolish huge sections of walls, allowing for much easier pathfinding. The pathfinding is actually pretty good in Rome 2. The defender definitely has an advantage. The towers are useful but not overpowered. There are multiple capture points, but you are encouraged as the defender, and not discouraged, I suppose, from actually holding multiple points. It's actually okay, because you usually end up with large armies. The one problem that does arise, though, is that the garrisons without an army actually stationed in the settlements can be the garrisons can be really weak. And because every general is basically an elite unit, sometimes the garrison just cannot handle even one elite unit. And so it's just a case of just grinding up against an elite unit that tactics is just immune to them, because you just need a stronger unit or enough ammunition, which you don't have because they've got so much armor. So garrisons can feel basically pointless in Total War Rome 2, especially with the Roman faction. But if you've got an actual army stationed in a settlement versus an army that's attacking, then it can actually feel quite satisfying. And it also depends very heavily on what faction you're playing. So if you're playing as a Greek faction, basically any faction that gets pikemen in the garrison, you have some degree of a chance, because pikemen are amazing in sieges in Rome 2, just like they were in Rome 1. So I'm going to put that under good sieges, because there's good potential there for gameplay. Not every single siege is going to be fought the same way. And so there's good elements there, but I think that garrisons and just the battle problems of Rome 2, where morale is almost irrelevant, I think those are the things that sort of hold the game back with sieges. Then we've got Total War Attila. I think Total War Attila builds upon Rome 2 systems and becomes amazing at sieges, because I think that Total War Attila, apart from the obvious optimization issues, Attila's actually got some of the best battles at a historical Total War I've ever seen, right? Because morale matters, tactics matter. An inferior unit can beat a superior unit with the right moves. These sieges are heavily impactful for both the attacker and the defender. So if a settlement is under siege for a long time, it'll cause all kinds of problems for the defenders as the settlement starts to burn. You can send certain units to burn around the city to inflict those penalties during the battle and cause small amounts of damage. You can see civilians running around and actually kill those civilians during the battle. The towers are impactful. The barricades are also incredibly impactful, but they don't respawn. You can't rebuild them, so you only get one shot of them. And the variety of different units that are available, everything has impact in Total War Attila Siege, in both the attack and the defense. One big criticism, or small criticism I suppose, for Total War Attila Siege is that at the early stages of the campaign, the garrisons are like 2 or 3 units strong, so that's pitiful in terms of actually defending against these settlements. However, it is sometimes possible to hold off a full stack of units with just 1 or 2 troops with Total War Attila if you make the right play. Like if you kill the enemy general and you happen to have a unit with like whistle shot, it'll make all the difference in Total War Attila, because morale matters so much in this game. So yeah, there's a lot of really good things happening with the sieges in Total War Attila, you know, outside of dealing with the Huns. Okay, then we've got Total War Warhammer. So there are 3 Total War Warhammers, and Warhammer 1 and 2 sieges are basically identical. Just Warhammer 2 just has more variety of maps. So I'm going to do both of these at the same time. So Warhammer 1 and 2, their sieges are bad. I love these games, specifically Warhammer 2, but the sieges are arguably the worst elements in these games. And it largely comes down to because it doesn't matter where you are, what race you're fighting, the sieges are pretty much all the same. They're very easy to cheese. The AI is atrocious in both attacking and defending. The walls are not really worth standing and fighting on. The towers are very powerful, but once they've reached past the towers, it doesn't mean anything. The butt ladders are just stupid. They need to get rid of that. I don't know why. It's been a persisting thing going on. It seems like all the newer Total War games all have butt ladders. It's just not a good system. There's not really many redeeming qualities to the sieges in Warhammer 1 or 2. It didn't further the systems that have been laid out in the past. They're not satisfying to play in both attack and defense in Total Warhammer 1 and 2. The maps are relatively small, at least compared to what came before, so they're just not good. Okay, then we've got Thrones of Britannia. So Thrones of Britannia came out after Total Warhammer 2, and the sieges in this game are actually amazing. So as much as I don't like Thrones of Britannia, because I think it's a nothing game with next to no content, the sieges are actually really good because the maps are really big. They've actually very similar to Total War Attila in how they function. I mean, Thrones of Britannia is basically a mod of Total War Attila with his less content in it, but all the units feel impactful. You get relatively small garrisons that you can build up over time in Thrones of Britannia. So the late game sieges are quite good. You can overcome overwhelming odds. And that being said, as the attacker, you have a lot of options available to you because the settlements are so large. There's just lots of things that a clever player can do to win against the odds. So that's what really makes good sieges. And it doesn't feel like the AI is just brain dead and running around in circles. They're actually trying their best to play the game as it's intended, as opposed to some games where the AI doesn't know how to play the own game that it's in. So I think the sieges are good in Thrones of Britannia. Probably one of the biggest redeeming qualities of this game. Then you've got Total War 3 Kingdoms. And I didn't play tons of Total War 3 Kingdoms. That being said, I didn't play tons of Thrones of Britannia either. And sieges were not one of the strongest elements of 3 Kingdoms. I'd go so far as to say that they're probably... I'd put them under good. They're definitely better than Rome Total War sieges because the pathfinding, which I think is absolutely critical, is there. The walls are relatively impactful. The towers are relatively impactful, but I think the big thing that holds 3 Kingdom sieges back is unit balancing when it comes down to romance mode. If you're playing in records mode, I don't think this is really an issue, and you could even argue records mode is actually amazing sieges. But when using single entities, the AI just doesn't know how to deal with that, and so it's oftentimes possible to just charge in with your lords once you've made a breach, and just run around capping points until the battle's won, because the AI just doesn't know what to do with it, because there's basically no collision for those units to just run right past everything. So obviously that's cheesing the game a bit, but I think that's a massive oversight that that is fundamental to this game, is that the single entities ruin the balancing of the game, especially with Lu Bu. So that's a big thing that actually holds the game back, not providing it extra flavor. Then we've got Total War Troy. Now, I think that Troy has got bad sieges. I don't enjoy the battles in Troy at all, much in the same way that I don't enjoy the battles in Total War Rome 2. Largely due to, I think, poor battle balancing, stupid AI, single entities ruining it, and also just massive AI bonuses, just cheats, which makes units that should have a tactical advantage over another unit almost irrelevant, just because they've gotten however much extra melee defense and melee attack and all this kind of stuff. So it sort of leans the player towards having to cheese in those sort of situations. I just find the sieges to be incredibly unsatisfying. At least the walled city sieges. The unwalled city sieges are not so bad. They're okay. But I oftentimes just auto-resolve the sieges just because I really didn't enjoy them. And what it really comes down to with these is, are you having fun or not? Do you want to be fighting sieges? Do you want to be defending your settlements? I found that the amount of garrison that we had normally in these settlements just wasn't really sufficient, and when going up against the AI and attacking their settlements, they just weren't very good at defending their settlements. The towers were overpowered, but could very easily, you could just sneak around. So just a lot of problems with this, just the battles in general with Troy. So overall, I just really didn't enjoy doing them. And then we come to Total War Warhammer 3, which I'd have to go and say that the sieges in Warhammer 3 are terrible. They're actually worse than Total War Warhammer 1 and 2, because in Warhammer 1 and 2, the sieges are bad, and Creative Assembly did a rework and addressed none of the issues, except maybe one of the issues. One of the big issues was the size of the maps. They were too small in Total War Warhammer 1 and 2. So the maps got a lot bigger, but the AI's brain got way smaller. The AI in defending and attacking sieges in Total War Warhammer 3 is the most brain-dead AI I have ever seen in any Total War game, except for maybe Empire Total War. The AI does not know how to play this game. It hasn't been programmed, it hasn't been playtested, it doesn't understand what it's doing. They're slowly starting to develop a little bit more, and that's great, but there's more problems aside from that. The minor city sieges, I think, are actually fine. The initial problem with them was the frequency of them. There was just every battle was a minor city siege, but now they're actually quite rare. So when you do actually fight one, it feels satisfying when you're both defending and when you're attacking, because the systems in play for minor city sieges is pretty good. It's just that it's heavily favored for the defender to just hold on to one position usually, as opposed to make use of the entire map, which I don't think was necessarily intended. Just sort of poor design choices, which this game is riddled with. But when it comes to walled city sieges, it's just wall-to-wall bad design choices. So one of the big criticisms as well with Warhammer 1 and 2 was that walls weren't really doing anything for the defender. So what did they do about it? Nothing. Now that the maps are bigger, you can usually just walk around the defender and just climb over the walls, because everyone's still got butt ladders, and oftentimes there are gaps in the tower's defenses. The towers are super strong, but they have less range and more wider arcs, but the player can just go around them. So the walls mean nothing. Even when you're the defender, holding onto fighting on the walls is super unsatisfying, because your units have no advantage fighting up on the walls, and you're actually better off fighting closer to your other towers that you can keep rebuilding. That's another problem, is constantly being able to rebuild towers and barricades, unlike in Total War Attila, where you set up the towers at the beginning of the battle and then that's it. If they get destroyed, too bad. You can't rebuild them. Total War Warhammer 3 just is riddled with these kind of problems, just all throughout. They pretty much need to gut the sieges and start again from scratch. They're so bad. They're on par with, unfortunately, the worst Total War game, in my opinion, Empire Total War. And I'm not saying I don't like Total Warhammer 3. I do like Warhammer 3, but sieges are undoubtedly one of the weakest elements by far in its battle system. And it's just due to incredibly stupid AI, kind of poor pathfinding, very poor systems in play, where the player is encouraged to avoid most of the elements of a siege and hyper-focus on all the stuff that actually has impact, which is usually just high-powered towers and a couple of barricades, just holding one position. And that's another thing as well. With the sieges here, why is there 2 capture points? And usually the 2 capture points that are important, like you can lose the battle if either one of them is captured, why are they so far apart? And why is it that these positions are usually some of the worst defensive positions in the entire map, where you can so easily get surrounded, where a few troops could not possibly hold up against an overwhelming force, where Medieval 2, a handful of troops can defeat a much larger army. In Warhammer 3, you need to have at least equal forces in order to defend a walled city siege. It's the opposite of what it should be. The defender should have the advantage, but the defender has a disadvantage because it has all of these penalties all over the place that the attacker can make use of. And luckily, the AI is not clever enough to make use of it a lot of the time, but they're still there. They're just very poor design through and through. Anyway, that's my tier list for the sieges in Total War, just Total War in general. Let me know in the comments below what you think of this tier list, whether you agree or disagree. Get a discussion going, because I think sieges is definitely an ongoing development issue with Creative Assembly with Total War games, because you get sometimes amazing sieges, and these games are kind of few and far between, and oftentimes they don't reuse assets or like techniques from good Total War games, and continuously reuse assets and bad systems from bad sieges and otherwise good Total War games. So this is important to sort of highlight this kind of stuff. Maybe Creative Assembly can see it, so maybe a future Total War game might actually be able to just consistently become amazing in sieges, because it's an important element in the grand scheme of conquering settlements, and it's an element to which Creative Assembly gets more often wrong than not. Anyway, that's the end of this one. Appreciate you guys. Don't forget to check out Manscaped, link in the description and in the pinned comment. Appreciate you, and we'll see you next time.